Dr. Jerry, we finally were able to get this coordinated. Well, one of the things I was going to say is like we had that little kerfuffle with the original recording of this, but I was like, man, we got to have this guy on because like one of the things that you guys recently went through, which I'm sure we'll get into, is you guys had to have a big announcement and a big update for Integris and everything going on, and we have a really good partnership. We love you guys, so I was really happy to have you on. Thanks for coming on. It's really good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you again, Stephen. I know we had to push this off quite a bit, but both sides of the orgs here, we had Right of Boom and we had some other conferences come up that kind of got in the way, so to speak. So I'm glad we didn't cancel it. We just had to delay it. So for anybody that was hoping to see something, sorry for the
Yeah,
delay.
it's here. It's here.
It's
Yeah,
here.
it's here. Yeah, so let's jump right into it because I
Yeah,
feel like there's a lot of value to be had here, especially for our MSP listeners, but also for people who work with MSPs from a customer's perspective of an MSP.
sure.
I think there's a lot that we could go into, but just really briefly, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and then Integris, so that we have something to work from.
Yeah, so my background's pretty easy. I'll give you kind of a 30-second elevator pitch on it. I started in the Marine Corps a long time ago, did 4 years on active duty, and then another 10 plus years as a Marine Corps contractor overseas. And then when I came back to the States, I went into federal healthcare and did another 7 plus years there. And then a large MSP reached out to me a little over 4.5 years ago, said, "How would you like to come work for an MSP?" And I said, "What is that?" But it sounded like a refreshing change from federal contracting. So I
Mm,
jumped into the
it was.
MSP space, big difference, and spent a few years with them. And I'm now with Integris, another very large MSP. I manage primarily corporate security, but in my past life, in the MSP space, I've done corporate client security, standing up products and portfolios and all that kind of stuff. But really, the thing for me was I came over to the MSP side, one, to do something obviously different than federal contracting, but two, to bring what we were doing in the federal space with our nearly unlimited budgets and resources to the MSP space, which we all know has very tight budgets and very limited
Oh yeah.
resources. And it was like, how closely could we mirror the security that we gave our government clients to our MSP clients, but on their budget? So that's kind of been my goal for the last 4 plus years is give them some similarity in the level of security we offered, but at a fraction of the budget.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one of the things that in the bio and just from looking at like your LinkedIn profile, you see a little bit of the innovator in you. You got a goal for not doing things status quo level, which is good. I mean, we need a little bit of a refresher in how things, especially with CMMC and everything. It's status quo is really hard sometimes. It really hurts people's budgets. Really messes people's workload up, things like that. So that's really cool to hear. Um, I wanted to ask, what's your current role and title at Integris for people who might not be super familiar with you, and what does kind of your day to day look like there?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Information Security, which is the corporate side of the house. So internal, I don't work with clients anymore. We have a VP that is specifically client facing. So I manage our actual corporate infrastructure and the security around it, specifically the security around it. So I make sure that we're secure, we're compliant. I was helping out. I normally wouldn't be a compliance person at Integris. We have our own compliance department, and they handle all of our compliance needs and certifications, but they were already underwater with a bunch of audits. So I took on CMMC. So in some of the webinars, your places you might see my name associated, it says CMMC, um, which is a little out of the norm for me in my current role, but I took that on and it just added to the security we were already performing.
What was it refreshing to get kind of back in the trenches? Was it fun?
I don't, I don't,
Hey, you don't even have to say anything.
I don't know if I'd use the word fun. It was definitely interesting to get back in it simply because CMMC, this is the first go around that everybody was going through.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was kind of like I'm not a pioneer in any way, but from the audit process perspective, I kind of felt that way because it was so early.
Yeah, I always feel like we just had one of our guys on our staff, uh, uh, Caleb Harrison. He's one of the newer members of our services team and internal operations team. And this was his first time. We just went through another client. It was his first time going through it, and it's the same thing I hear from everybody that has their first time representing, somebody going through, the auditee, right, the OSC. You guys being the OSC in that situation, or others in that situation. I always hear the same thing, that it is like super insightful going through it the first time. Like
Yeah.
there are things that the assessor asks and how they act, the perspectives that they hold on these controls that you've been going over and over and over again as you're prepping, that they just bring a whole new light. It's super insightful. That's why I love them so much, because I feel like I learn something every single time, and I've been on quite a few now. So yeah, I agree. So, I mean, I'm sure you had a little bit of that. It was a little bit of tea sipping for you.
It's weird because I've literally sat through hundreds of audits. I've
Hmm.
directly been involved in audits, and then I've led teams that handled the audits, and I've just played a very small role. But I have the experience of hundreds of audits across HIPAA, high trust, SOC 2, FISMA, low and moderate, and now CMMC. So having gone through so many audits, there's kind of like a standard just playbook and practice that auditors use and the way things work and play out. CMMC was nothing like that. And this is I think the first time in my career where I tell people, and this is not a plug to try to get someone to come to Integris, although we're happy to bring you
Yeah.
in as a client, but to say that everyone's doing their best out there to inform people and educate people and help their clients get compliant. But if you have not gone through the audit, you are not equipped to really do that. You can help and you can move the goalpost,
Right.
but to say emphatically that you are now ready and you will pass if you haven't gone through it, I think you're doing a disservice to your customers if you prop them up with that kind of hope, because I've just never been through an audit that was this different and this detailed and scrutinized in the way it was.
It is different, isn't it? Like,
It is.
I sat through a couple like SOC 2 type, the report assessments for SOC 2 type 2, and I've dealt with ISO. It is different. Like, and one of the things that's interesting about CMC, and I'm sure we'll get to, I want to get back to some of the introductory stuff, but like why I'm thinking about some of the things that is interesting about CMC is it's supposedly revolving around kind of industry standard assessment methodologies. Like, for example, C3POs and have to have certain ISO accreditations, right? For long term, is the cyber AV has to have certain ISO accreditations, because they want to acknowledge that there are like tried and true methodologies. But you're right; it's like it's a whole new flavor, it feels like, and it's not, and again, I'm not trying to scare people off either from saying like
No.
this is a totally different beast. Like, in some ways it is, and you're also dealing with a lot of not well defined precedent set situations, and you're dealing with a lot of assessor variance. But yeah, I agree with you. It's kind of that's, and again, that's part of why I love it, is because it's like it's a whole new world in some ways. But yeah, no, I agree. I did want to get back. Thank you for the introduction to yourself. And we're gonna come back to Integris, because I do want people to be very familiar by the end of listening to this with what Integris does and how they stand out. But people might see you on LinkedIn, might see your efforts leading, providing commentary, providing some sharing, knowledge sharing and things like that. But one of the things I just love about this podcast is I love people being able to come out the other end of it, knowing the person, not just as a talking head that provides knowledge sharing, but knowing that this is a real human being with a background, with an experience that they can relate to better, hopefully. And that hopefully will build more camaraderie and trust if they come to work with you, or they see your content. They know that this guy, he has barbecues every weekend with some golfer or something, whatever. There's like real human experience here. So if you don't mind, I'd love to go back kind of, to where you grew up, how you grew up, anything like I said when we were kind of talking at the beginning before we started recording, anything that you're willing to share from a personal perspective. I'd love to go back as far as you can.
Yeah, I have a fairly boring upbringing, if you will. I mean, I grew up obviously with parents and a sister. I went to public school for most of my life, and then I went over to private Christian school for a few years, which really allowed me to get a better education and kind of see the value in education.
Yeah.
And then I finished high school. I went to college and took some courses, worked a little bit. Didn't finish my degree. Just was like, this isn't fitting for me in my life right now. It just didn't. I don't know. It just didn't feel right. And I was a bartender, waited tables, just made the ends meet, and decided to go in the military. I thought it was the right decision. It was something I wanted to do in high school on a buddy program that ended up, just kind of fell through. But I went ahead and decided to go in by myself. Joined the Marine Corps, and straight into it, I said, I'm going to pick a job that, if for some reason this doesn't work out, I don't like it, at least I can get out and take care of myself. And I picked the computer field. Thankfully, I did that because I got injured on active duty,
Mm.
and basically had to finish my forward, and I wasn't able to continue. So at least I had now a field I could fall back on and 4 years of experience. Picked up my bachelor's degree basically while I was in the military. And then I went overseas. I had friends that were in the military that worked for General Dynamics and some other big defense contractors. So they hooked me up with a job overseas where I had previously been stationed. Was there for about 10 years and got a lot of golf in. And the government takes a lot of days off and closes bases for all sorts of events. So I was able to deploy a lot, play a lot of golf, travel, kind of just hung out and did that for 10 years or so. And then as the contract was coming to an end, I said, well, this has been fun, but one, I'd like to go back to the States. And two, you kind of have to get back into a professional mindset because hanging out for 10 years doesn't look good on a resume. And I was like, how am I going to
That's a
move
good
up?
point.
Yeah. I've played a lot of video games, a lot of golf, and that while fantastic, doesn't look good because I'm not good enough to be a PGA pro. So then I started focusing more on the career and on moving up the corporate ladder, and I finished off some other additional degrees. I got my doctorate in cybersecurity. I teach part time for a couple of universities. So was doing all that, and then came back to the States and did some project management work to try to tie that together with IT and cyber, and then moved into full time cyber roles and really focused on how do I move up the corporate ladder because what I noticed in the military, and it carries over to the civilian sector, is if you're not in charge, you don't get to make the decisions. It's harder to fix problems. It's harder to innovate. So I just thought I need to get as high as I can so I can have a bigger voice, and that was really
Mm.
my goal. And I focused every bit of effort and time I had on it. And while everybody else was having a good time, I was studying and working hard, and finally reached that pinnacle.
That's so cool. I want to ask you about your doctorate program. But really quickly, so when you were in the military, what was the specific MOS? Like, what was the day to day work that you were doing that was kind of preparing you for the rest of your career?
So that one's weird. So when I got out of boot camp, my title or MOS was Small Computer Systems Specialist, and they've changed it over the years, so I don't know what it's called now.
Mm.
Um, but they sent me to school to learn about how to build servers, how to build computers, how to do networking, routing, switching, that kind of thing. I
Gotcha.
immediately fell in love with the routing and switching aspect, and I started down the Cisco track and got my CCNA and CCNP certs because I just enjoyed it. But then when I went overseas, because I had a top secret clearance, they threw me in what they call a local control center. And essentially, it years ago, 20, 24 years ago, they had what was basically encrypted email that what we would call encrypted email today. But lots
Yeah.
of computers, lots of encryption, stuff like that. And basically, our job was managing the encrypted communications that came in and out of the base. So we were like a big kiosk for officers that had to come release encrypted messages or get messages, things like that, troop
Mm.
movements, etc. So I kind of played around in like an exchange environment, which was not what I'd signed up for. But because I was passionate with the networking, I kept going with the networking side. And then when I was able to transition to my last duty station in Hawaii, I got to play around a lot more with the networking side.
Did that when you were in that role, was it more Was it more like just the technical, doing subnetting and VLANs and ACLs and things like that, or did it expand into more of like, were there compliance elements from like the ATO for that system that you were constantly going back and forth with and dealing with? Like, were you, I guess my question is, were you getting a lot of the compliance, at least innuendos, while you were doing all this technical stuff too? Or was it mainly like you were just bare bones focused on technical?
On active duty, it was technical, and honestly, I don't want to make it sound glorious because it wasn't. I basically sat in front of a monitor and waited for messages to come in, read them, and go, "Who do I need to contact for this message?" File it, next message, and we were all watch standards because we had to man the shop 24/7. So I worked a lot of third shift, and I'd be there. I was injured on active duty, so I couldn't go out and do physical training in the morning. So
Mm.
I would work the third shift so others could go out and train. So basically, I'd be there from midnight to 7 waiting for messages to come in, or that random officer that had to release something at 3 a.m. and there had to be someone there type thing. It
That's
wasn't
interesting.
until I moved on into um, basically about to get out of the military, and then the first jobs that I had when I got out of the military, that's when compliance really started to kick in, and then federal healthcare, that was nothing but compliance.
Yeah, I bet with all the HIPAA stuff and just generally soldier PHI. Yeah, we have a customer right now where they have this super complex situation. I'm sure you're kind of familiar with what their setup is. They have this super complex like application that they use to support their insurance claims process, and they got soldiers using it for their claims and the providers for them, and it's just a super complex Kubernetes and all the different infrastructure elements that go into running an application, and they're getting the CMMC requirements levied on them. So it's like they're not just juggling like a normal system where they're getting certain files and like blueprints for a CNC router, or they build some kind of training documentation for the government, or whatever the contract deliverable would be. But they actually manage this kind of like this major application. So it's just super complex, and that is one of the main things, is because they have soldier PHI flowing through that application, which is a form of CUI under certain contracts. It's like, yeah, it's very very heavy. So I can imagine when you got out of the military that being like very in your face, especially when you're working from it on the government side. Yeah, I
Yeah,
get that.
I mean, it was a big benefit, right? When you go to work for any federal agency and they say you come from DoD, it's okay. You come from the probably one of the most lockdown environments on the planet. I'm sure there's some three-letter acronym agencies that are worse, but for the most part, DoD is the most locked down. So there's a lot of compliance issues, a lot of security issues, a lot of how do you make things work when everything they're doing is to try to prevent you from being able to work. It seems like. So that really helped me, and that actually is what led me into my dissertation. Was I actually wanted to look at why end users violated security policy, because coming from DoD, I didn't understand it. I'm used to what DoD says. So if they say you can't do it, it's like okay, but others weren't.
You were a
So
soldier. You followed. You did what you were told. That's not how the world works.
yeah, that's not how the world works, and it was very eye opening. It was like, why are so many people just adamantly breaking rules left and right? Like, well,
Mm.
what appears to be no rhyme or reason. So I said, I'm going to write a dissertation on this and find out. And I actually interviewed more than 100 government employees and contractors, and I couldn't believe their honesty and why they do what they
Wow.
do. It was shocking. So that's also what kind of helped me frame what am I going to do going forward is, okay, I know I have to secure things, but I know that people are going to behave the way these
People
people
do.
behave.
Yeah.
So how do I do it to where we're still secure and they're not looking for every way to bypass every security control I put in place?
Well, let me ask you about that. So this is for your was this for your PhD program?
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, you said you interviewed so many people, and these you said these were federal people. This wasn't even just general commercial workers. This was like people on the govy side.
Mhm.
What was like the, if you don't mind me asking, what did you find out? Like what was the outcome there? I haven't
The
read your dissertation, so I'm not sure.
No, it's not public. It wasn't published publicly, I don't think. Basically, there was only a couple real answers, and 80+% of the people fell into like a bucket of like 3 or 4 answers. One was they had a timeline, they had a deadline, and they couldn't miss their deadline, so they were going to do whatever it took.
Hmm.
Some flat out just didn't care what the rules were. It was like, look, I have a job to do. You're either going to get in trouble for not doing the job or not completing it, or you're going to get in trouble if caught for bypassing the rules. So it was like a roll of the dice. And then quite a few of them said, look, I don't actually believe that there's anything in place to punish me. And when I look around and I've seen others break it, one, they don't seem to get caught. And two, when they do, they don't get punished for it. So what's the harm? And we see this in
Wow.
in cyber everywhere, right? People hack people and ransomware people, and even when they're caught, what do they do 6 months in prison or something, like if anything. So the idea was, you all are inconveniencing me. I don't feel like getting yelled at for being late or missing a deadline, so I'm just going to do whatever I need to meet that deadline, because the penalty for not meeting the deadline was more severe than breaking the rules. So, and that was overwhelmingly the response.
That is, I when you said that and I was asking that, my gut reaction was I was assuming you were going to say just because people it would just be sheerly because of convenience, and that being the only, that always being the problem, right? Is when people violate policy, it's because it's an inconvenience, and I know that there's a hint of that with what you said, but the fact that they went a layer deeper and it's like I don't see any repercussions for me doing this turns this more into like an actual like ethical thing.
Oh yeah.
Like what is your analysis of like how did we get to that point in the government side from your view where people are willing to say that that's the actual reason is they just don't feel that there's any legitimate enforcement of this.
But one, I was shocked that anybody answered honestly. I mean, when I started the survey, it was an interview, but it was a survey, so it wasn't done like in person. But people had to fill out the responses, and
Mm-hmm.
they volunteered to do it. And I thought, okay, volunteering and being anonymous was going to offer a little bit of honesty and transparency. But depending on the question, they might say, hey, I can't really tell if this is going to be anonymous, and who knows if I'll go report this back to their leadership. So I was shocked on how brutally honest they were. But again, they don't fear getting in trouble. And what I really found was that, well, at least within the federal space, when you talk compliance, there's a person over there saying we have to do this because compliance said so, or the auditor said so. No one ever stops to evaluate. There might be 5 different ways to be compliant. Which one has the least impact on the user? Or which one is, the easiest for the user to adapt to and just kind of digest? It's just some person chooses what that solution will be and then just forces it on everyone. And I think that was my biggest takeaway, is like, at the end of the day, you still have to be secure, but you don't have to work in a vacuum and choose how you do it. You can collaborate with people and say, if I did this, would this work for you? How could I tweak it to be better? But I still have to meet my need over here. I'm still going to be audited. And I think on the commercial side, especially in the MSP space, we do a lot better job of that than the government did.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think it's that once you move is it just because I'll give you my hypothesis. Tell me what you think about this. I have heard from people who would know that there are instances. Obviously, I can't name names, so it might sound discredited, but like there are instances where there are specific requirements put into certain packages like ATOs and whatnot
Mm-hmm.
for government programs and government systems that contractors and govy people are working, civilian workers are working on alike. There's a lot of hands in the pot,
Sure.
and there are like requirements that are levied that say a general or somebody higher up gets complained to from like a a SCAVI assessor saying they're not meeting the requirements. There's problems here. There's vulnerabilities that they're not addressing. This poem has been on this, this issue has been on this poem for 2 years now or whatever. And like the general sentiment from in situations like that is like, well, we need this solution to work. We need this product. We need whatever the ATO is for. And um, you know, essentially the compliance requirements be darned, like, and this is from like higher ups. Do you think it's because, and I guess my question is, do you think it's because there's like internal contradictions like that you've seen firsthand, where it's like, yeah, people in charge are levying these requirements to mitigate risk from an RMF perspective, but then other people in charge, or even maybe similar people in similar roles, are saying, yeah, but the mission is more important than the security of the mission. Does that make sense?
It does. And the reality is it's different for each federal agency, but you'll see some commonality and similarities here. On DoD side, they're quick to say warfighter comes first. And I agree.
Yeah.
Like, if I had to choose between being compliant or keeping a warfighter alive, alive is the answer, right? No one disputes that. But it's used too much because there are things that you can do to still be secure and compliant that don't negatively impact the warfighter. The fact that you're just not going to look for those solutions because it's easier to throw out that cliche, they do that too often. They're also, I don't know how many people know this, but like even when you go on an exercise, whoever, typically you'd have like a commanding general, let's say back in garrison, and then you go on a deployment and a full bird colonel might be in charge. They take operational command of whatever's happening at that level, and they can make any decision they want. So even if I was out there trying to set up security and get them ready, they can go, I don't want you setting up anything. Leave it in the box. We're going to go do whatever. They have
Hmm.
a operational authority to do it, and I don't go back and tell on them. Hey, your risk, right? And that's just how they operate. And it's like, well, it's the military. And then move over into federal healthcare, and it's similar in that they go, we still have a mission. So I worked for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, for 7+ years as a contractor. Well, they have to keep Medicare and Medicaid running, right? So people have to be able to go to a hospital or go to a doctor, and records have to get updated, and services need to be ordered. So you can't interrupt service for its life or death for your average citizen or an elderly patient or something like that.
Right.
Well, they'll fall back on the same thing. This is operationally, we have to have this. So you just get in, I think in the federal space, you get very comfortable being able to use, I don't want to call it an excuse, but like this outlet for why you don't have to do certain things. And then the side that nobody talks about, when you work in the federal side, vendors and partners very much want contracts and they want deals with those agencies. They don't want to lose that partnership. So if they go in and say, hey, I have to audit you and here's what you have to do, and you're not meeting it, you're not doing what you need to do to pass, at the risk of losing their contract and not being selected for renewal, they will bend. They will let the government tell them, well, I think I'm doing it, even though you say I'm not, and magically you pass.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of, they don't want to. It took them a lot of work and a lot of time to get their foot in the door with that agency. The last thing they want to do is lose that contract, and then be basically blackballed from other agencies with the way the selection process works. So that's something you see on the federal side. You don't see as much, I think, in the commercial side.
Right. Yeah. Because it sounds like to me, and correct me if you think I'm wrong. It just sounds like to me that the incentives are totally different, right? Like on the federal side, the incentive is making whoever's in charge happy with them getting their tank or whatever it is. Whereas on the commercial side, um, if you're not meeting, say we're talking about a specific compliance requirement, let's use CMMC for example. If Integris isn't able to produce a CRM and to demonstrate that they have background checks on their employees, all the things that might come up during an OSC, one of your customers' assessments, there's a risk to your revenue there, right? Because they could go with someone else. Whereas the federal government is kind of guaranteed that money, right? Like it's kind of it. I don't. Again, I've never worked on the federal side, but this is kind of the recurring thing that I'm hearing is like there's a totally different incentive structure for it's give me my product, give me my tank, give me my jet, whatever it is. Um, Protect the warfighter again, which is a totally noble and right thing to pursue. Whereas for Integris, it's like on the commercial side, supporting say DoD contractors, you're kind of now conflating all these different incentives, but you got to prioritize what's going to be best for Integris first. Not you know what I mean? Like what's going to keep food on your employees' tables, right? Like, and that's might include making sure you have compliance requirements in place so you're eligible to be used by these DoD contractors. Yeah, I think it's a totally. I mean, do you agree with that assessment?
No, I think that's accurate. And I think it just comes down to, on the MSP side, we only exist because of our clients.
Exactly.
There's we can form a company and call it an MSP, and if we have no clients, then what are we? Just a name on a piece of paper, right? So
Yeah.
we exist specifically because of our clients. So we're trying to do everything we can to be on the up and up, doing things on the straight and narrow, and be compliant and be secure. And God forbid anything happens and you have a breach, that was something you could not have prevented. It was,
Right.
you did every possible reasonable thing to prevent it. The federal side, that's just not the same. There's too much money to be made. There's too many award fees that are involved in contracts. I mean, there's also fines for being late and missing deadlines and not delivering. So there's no point winning a contract only to be fined and lose all of your profit. So
Right.
it's just like you say, it's a different structure. They're incentivized differently. Um, I don't
Yeah.
know. To some extent, there's a good old boy network. There's pay to play. Like there's all these dynamics that take place that if you can figure out how to navigate that, the last thing you want to do is navigate it and then lose it. So they're just incentivized different. Whereas again, on the MSP side, we're incentivized to keep our customers happy and secure. That's why we exist.
Yeah. I think that just rings true. I don't know how you look at it any other way. I think it just rings true. So, and I do think that because of that, on the federal side, it does impact downstream you guys and your customers, right? Like there is an element to this where it has caused a lot of confusion for you. Like that's why there's so much misinformation and confusion when it comes to CMMC and stuff like that. Because now the federal expectations for compliance is obviously, since with DFARS 7012 even and all that stuff, it's been expanded to the contractors and these commercial entities supporting the government. And so there's like this, I feel like it's this conflict of incentives. It's like, how do we keep a supply chain that's going to give us these products, right? Get the general his airplane or whatever it is, but also like these are, enshrining award stipulations for contracts that are compliance focused, is like, yeah, that could lead to a reduction in supply chain where, yeah, maybe the general won't get the plane as soon as he wants for the sake of security. It's like, I feel like there's these competing, whereas in just the federal space and just just in those agency internal, ATOs and stuff like that, I feel like the incentive structure is much more one sided. It's like, how can I what's the mission? How do we protect the mission? So I don't know. I feel like that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. It's just been my thoughts for quite a bit now, and just from what I'm hearing.
Well, I think one thing, and this is 100% me, my opinion. I have no way to prove this or disprove this, and I don't know if people agree with me. But
We'll see in the
I'm
comments.
of the, I'm of the belief that when I worked in the federal space, they put out a lot of contracts to small businesses, minority owned, woman owned, service disabled owned. And there were a lot of contracts that you were not allowed to give it to a big. It had to go to a small company. It was just the law required it.
Yeah.
And if and only if no small could meet the requirements, could you then open it up? And that pigeonholes people when they want to work with certain vendors. I think my gut tells me CMMC is trying to change the landscape to some extent. There are big companies that the government and the DoD wants to work with. And I think some of the rules and the way that they put out these requirements and the expense that you have to spend to get certified and everything was a way to shrink the DIP community so that they didn't
Hmm.
have to work with so many vendors. Either people will go out of business, they'll get bought up, they'll merge, whatever. But
Or
it
they
makes
won't be eligible for certain contracts and they'll just focus on other ones.
Right. And to me,
Interesting.
seems like it makes it easier on DoD because then when they have to rely on the DIB community to supply them everything from bolts to bombs to produce to whatever, the pool of applicants is smaller and the pool of partners is smaller. And I think it just simplifies things. And I'm sure there's lobbying out there. The big defense contractors want to suck up as much work as they can. But I think there was a concerted effort when CMMC came out to say, let's let's shrink the environment a little bit.
Hmm.
Like I said, it's all my opinion, but I just feel like the way they went about it, it leads to that.
Yeah, I'll be interesting to see what people think about that, because I don't think it's like, it's not an aliens level conspiracy, right? Like that is a legitimate impact. I mean, we've seen firsthand contractors say, "I'm stepping out of the ring on this because of CMMC." Now, is there validity to that rationale from like an ethical perspective? I don't agree with that because, again, I agree with many in the industry with some caveats, of course, that the requirements have been there for years, and you've been attesting to meeting the requirements for years, right? And so, in one way or another, either you've been meeting the requirements or you've been violating the stipulations of your contract. Um, I am not going to go so far as to say, and there are some people in the industry that I'd love to just sit down and have a cordial like back and forth with them on this particular statement that you've had these requirements since X year, 2016 with DFARS 2012 or whatever, 2017, and because I don't agree with that statement fully. But to your point, I don't think it's a totally irrational way to look at it. Obviously there's just not really any public way to confirm that or
And don't
yeah,
look at it from a conspiracy perspective, because that's not really my intent. I look at it also from the perspective of, look, when 7012 came out, like you said, it's been out for years. People have been attesting on every contract award that they're meeting the requirements, and we know they're
right.
not. Right? There wouldn't have been a need for CMMC if
If that had
people,
been true. Yeah,
and the
exactly.
government has come out flat out said that people were lying to them. It was an honor system. Even when they did that first, I think it was it maybe 100 or 300 DIPCAC assessments, they came back and said the results were abysmal, where everybody came in saying, I believe I score a perfect 110, and they were so abysmal that they were considering prosecuting under the False Claims Act. And what
Mm,
that told me was, some people think they're doing a good job and they're meeting the intent, and they just simply don't understand. Others are flat out lying. The government
right.
is not good at determining who's telling the truth and who's lying, nor prosecuting all of them. And they can't, because then business would grind to a halt and they need services. So I
Right.
think it's not about conspiracy or ethics as much as it is about, if I have a smaller group of people I work with and they're larger and they can afford to meet our compliance requirements, I have a better shot at getting security and a secure product and service. And the
Right.
smaller organizations that don't understand or can't afford it would either be forced to sell or leave, which lowers DoD's risk. So it's not like I think they want to partner with one of the big five because they're being bought off.
Yeah, you're not saying there's a conflict of interest problem here. This is more so a
Right.
just general risk,
There could
like
be, right? But I don't think that's the driver. I think the
right.
driver is how, I mean, the DoD put out, I don't remember what the number is. It's roughly 300,000 DIB contractors, something like that, two to 300,000.
Yeah, it's something like that in
How
if
do
you
you
look at the
manage
proposed
two
rule,
to
you'll see
three
that. Yeah.
hundred thousand contractors that all have to have some level of security that has to be validated in many cases by an auditor, and there aren't even enough auditors to go around and validate? How do you do that? So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the interesting thing is there's obviously differences of opinion even in the professional ecosystem here with a lot of the SMEs that do the knowledge sharing about, bandwidth and what does it look like to have enough assess like CCAs and CCPs to formulate assessment teams, like the regardless of the truth of that claim. I what I'm saying is I don't think it's totally unrealistic to assume that, look, a lot this is going to suck for a lot of companies. It already is sucking for a lot of companies, but I think the outcome, which is something I think we all can agree on, the outcome of this, if implemented properly with, and that's part of the why the phased roll in is there. If implemented properly, the outcome is going to be better than, at least from a security perspective, than it was before, which is the whole point, right? I think we can all kind of rally around that. As unfortunate as it's going to be for small mom and pop shops that a lot of their income was from these DoD contracts, but that either they procrastinated or they're low information, right? That's another thing that I am empathetic towards a lot of companies for is, there's still people asking what the heck is CMMC in the first place today, right? Like we see it today still. And it's like, if that's a legitimate question, it's not just people trying to cover themselves for procrastinating or for, like you said, outright lying, then I don't I just want to express like it still is something that I'm empathetic towards, but at the end of the day, I think to your point, to kind of just the general sentiment, I think the outcome is going to be better. It's going to be but it's going to get worse before it gets better. You know what I mean. And I think we're already seeing that some, but
And
no, yeah,
I don't think we should. It's not a. It's not a like a bad negative thing. That's not doom and gloom. There's a ton of
right,
opportunity here. I think for those
100%,
that are willing to go through this process and willing to put the time and money and effort into it, it's going to pay massive dividends.
yeah,
Between contracts they are going to be awarded in the future, the ability to say I probably meet 70% or more of multiple other certification frameworks just by what I've done, maybe to
yeah,
branch out and to work with other federal agencies like Department of Energy or Commerce or Interior or something like that that hasn't necessarily adopted CMMC, but would gladly take on and award you a contract based on meeting NIST 800-171. All of those kinds of things. I think at the end of the day,
yeah, it's
everyone's
huge.
security level and maturity is better. How much will be dependent upon where you were when you started. Um, I think the anyone who's done federal contracting and understands the RFP process and the bid and the award process, I think the one thing that's in the back of everyone's mind is I'm likely not going to make or recoup any of the money I spend to get certified. Even though by legally they're allowed to put all of that into their bid and the government says they'll pay it, government
Yeah, they're
doesn't.
going with the cheapest option,
They're going
right?
with the cheapest, right? So if you pad your bid to cover your costs, you likely won't win. So as long as you can get past this is a pay to play type thing, and it's for the most part a one-time fee, I think it's a massive
Yeah,
market advantage for our customers to go ahead and do it.
yeah, and in the long term, if the government stays true to their approach with this, which is, it seems like there's nothing changing, right? It seems like CMC is not going away. This is all, this is all kind of set in stone now. Obviously with the phase rollout, but if that is the case, then the companies that have been, falsely attesting and, are bidding lower because they haven't had costs to deal with and are winning contracts or being awarded contracts, that's all very soon going to start to crumble, right? Because, now we're actually dealing with what the 32 CFR and the 48 CFR require for the contract to be awarded in the first place. And I think I agree with you. I think this is not a doom and gloom situation. I think for many there will be unfortunate circumstances, but it's not a doom and gloom because, our warfighter, our country, there's a lot of benefit from a security perspective that's coming just by virtue of implementing this program. And yes, some companies will struggle with this, but on the other end, the companies that have been doing their due diligence and have been, implementing the requirements and have not been able to outbid other companies that have been kind of undercutting them because they haven't had the same costs that they have, will maybe no longer be even eligible for award, and they'll recoup the costs in some way, but it will be, I agree with you. It's going to be a long-term benefit, pay to play type approach. And that is the reality of even from back when DFARS 7012, was levied. There's money that comes with implementing this 800-171, regardless of who you are, what you do. Um, it's a cost of business, right? And that is the goal. So I agree with you. It's not doom and gloom. I don't mean to intend anybody see that. I just mean to express empathy for people who have limited information or haven't spent the time, haven't realized how significant of a deal this is, and are kind of just now coming into this, and it's still happening. Like, we still see it. So there's a chance to make it right, but it is a big deal. I agree.
And that's what I feel for our customers. Like, the Integris customers, I hope they look at it as a cost of doing business. That's a term I use all the time. Just
Yeah.
find it in your budget. It's a cost of doing business. You'll recoup it through contract awards and award fees and things like that down the road, like you said. Um, but go out there, get certified. Even if you think that you might go after a level 2 self-attestation type RFP, go get certified. My hope is the government moves to as many certified RFPs as possible, because now our customers who have gone through and gotten certified will have that leg up. They'll have that differentiator that knocks out a ton of their competition, and it'll make it even more worth what they went through. And then in the end, they're not going through alone. They're going to go through it with us. We
Right.
went through it with you. You all helped us get through it. It's totally doable. It's not.
Totally
It's
doable.
not. I mean, it's a hill. It's a big hill, but you can climb it. And we're not going to leave our customers out to dry. We'll help them get through it, and they'll do the same things that we did. And then we know if we pass, they'll pass. That kind of mentality. But when it's all done and you look back, it's going to be a massive accomplishment, and I think it's going to be a huge differentiator, especially for the early adopters. And I think they're going to be happy. They'll be smiling after the fact, going, "Look at what we're eligible to obtain that others aren't." And I think that's just the approach you have to take because it's going to suck. Like
Yeah. Well,
everything.
and you make a good point. One thing that are you familiar with Carter Schoenberg in the industry? He works over at Soundway. He was saying one time, and I just really I love this quote from him, or I don't know if it's a quote. I'm going to paraphrase, but he's a really big advocate for putting not just putting the problem to people like, this is a problem that you need to solve. The problem is you're not compliant with CMMC requirements in the 32 CFR and DFARS 7012. You need to solve that, or you're not going to be eligible for contracts. But even down to like, we're talking about organizations that have risks, right? That's the whole point. Like, they have internal actual risks. It's not just risks of, them losing their contract, although that is one of the many huge risks that they have. But it's like, at the other end of this, they work with you guys, you're their MSP, but you're also helping them from a compliance perspective. On the other end of this, they're just generally going to be more secure, and the risks to like actual dollar amount things, like tangible, like monetary risks, things that if those risks were to be exploited and realized in their system, they would lose a lot of money, like just real risks. At the
Right.
other end of this can only help mitigate that. Like, that's kind of the whole point, especially if you kind of take it seriously, and you're not, a lot of companies do an enclave just to kind of get there quickly. And that's a totally understandable approach. But especially for companies who say, not only do we want to do this to be contractually compliant, right, with our checkbox of compliance for our contract, but we actually want to leverage 800 171 or whatever it is for like satisfying our internal need for risk management, right? So that we're knocking out and we're mitigating these X number of dollar problems in our system, that if we mitigate that, the chance of those being realized and us losing that amount of money is reduced. Like, that's a real way to convince people that, hey, this isn't just the government putting their foot down and on your neck. This can be an opportunity, like you said, to increase your chance of getting more awards and working with other agencies and stuff like that, but also mitigating internal risks, like and saving your internal organizational revenue and stuff like that, and protecting your people and protecting your assets. There's real opportunities there too.
Yeah, and I think these human beings in general, they could tell you 10 negatives or 10 reasons why not to do something they shouldn't. They have a hard time and struggle with the why they should and the positive.
Right.
And I think there's so many that if we change our mindset, so okay, what if you don't want to work with DoD anymore, but you provide a service that others need? Okay, you're better equipped to go do it. What if you want to branch out overseas and someone says you need ISO and GDPR, and all of a sudden you're 70% of the way there because there's so much overlap in the CMMC controls?
Yeah.
What if you're attacked and you're breached and you have to go in court and show due care and due diligence? And now all of a sudden you can show that, and a jury would say they did everything reasonable.
Yeah.
What if you have to call your cyber insurance provider, and you actually want to get paid out for a claim, or you want lower premiums, you want lower deductibles? Like, all those are positive wins that you get by going through this process that I think people don't think
100%.
about. But if you were to write them all down and then say, now what is it costing me to achieve all of this? A few months and $50,000. Well, you can recoup. Most people could recoup that in their cyber premiums and deductibles alone. So I
Right.
think it's just the perspective of how you frame it and who's looking at it in what way. That if they just change that, this is a phenomenal opportunity, I think, for people.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I guess that leads me to want to talk about Integris. So can you kind of give me a more in depth view of, so where did Integris come from? Like, what's the background that Integris has? I know that you you've had several different positions, but you're higher up in Integris now, right? So you have a lot of backing and background in Integris. So tell me about Integris. Tell me about what Integris specializes in. Like, there's a lot of MSPs out there, but what kind of sets Integris apart? And then just kind of, I want to, after that, I want to get into some of the challenges that Integris is tackling, more specifically.
Yeah, so I've been with Integris for going on a year and a half. So I wasn't with Integris, when it started and when it
Right.
grew. And Integris is just like most or all large MSPs has grown both organically and through acquisition. So we've renamed and rebranded over the years. Um, but in general, we serve the SMB, the small, the medium business market, right, and community. We offer a full range of MSP services as well as co-managed services for those clients who maybe are a little bit larger, have an internal team or a few people. We offer the full MSSP suite of pretty much every security product and service that you can think of, primarily because of all the different compliance frameworks having some requirement, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um, we really have industry verticals that we support. So a lot of finance and banking, manufacturing, healthcare, defense, legal, um, pretty much anyone and everyone. There's some form of that being supported by Integris, which I think is phenomenal. And
Yeah.
having that breadth to be able to go and see what does each group need. Even within, say, manufacturing, every company's needs are a little bit different, but there's a theme that you kind of get with manufacturing, and then a theme with healthcare, different compliance requirements, different certification requirements. So we're very fortunate that because we touch so many different industry verticals, we get to see what makes them tick, what are their needs, what are their challenges, and then how do we solution something to make their life easier, better, faster, cheaper, etc. And then it comes time to do the certifications, and we're already 5 steps ahead because we're doing all of these things already, and we didn't do it with a compliance focus in mind initially. Um, we also have a lot of certifications. I mean, we practice what we preach. We shouldn't tell you that we can lead you through something we haven't done ourselves, which is why we chose to be
Exactly.
an
That's
early
huge.
adopter.
That's
Yeah,
huge.
I mean, I don't want to ding anyone else, but who am I to tell you how to achieve CMMC compliance if I myself haven't done it? We all thought that was huge. So we did that early. We achieved that in Q4 of last year. Um, Going through multiple ISO certifications, HIPAA certifications, SOC 2, GDPR. So like we're going through a lot. We've got a trust center that you can actually go out there and look at all of our certifications and all the things we're doing, which is exciting. But
Yeah.
again, the goal was just to try to service a community that's underserviced, and has unique challenges and budget issues, and give them the same quality of service that you would expect like at the enterprise level, but on an SMB price point. I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah. I want to ask you about that. So Integris comes into the game to essentially enable people who don't want to have a voice for like lobbying abilities and things like that, and so they're kind of stuck with the cards that they're dealt from contracts or just general, GDPR, talking about their international work and things like that. Um, what are you seeing as like? And this is a genuine question. I'm not just trying to fill air here. What are you actually seeing as like the biggest problems that those smaller and medium sized businesses are facing when it comes to compliance in general? Like, I can think of like probably two big ones that I could see. You already mentioned one with budget, like, but I'm sure you're on the ground level. What are you seeing?
I think budget's always first and foremost, right? Small businesses are trying to reinvest every dollar they have into growing and taking care of their employees, having these expenses that they weren't expecting to have in a lot of cases. There's always new regulation coming out. I think each state having the ability to put out its own regulation on top of all the federal regulations is making it more difficult for those companies who have branched out and maybe are working in a multi-state environment. No different than multinational, but those that have stayed, within the U.S. probably weren't expecting to have the same challenges.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a lot of regulatory compliance issues that are being sprung on people. There's a lot of webinars also that come out that will say, "Hey, you work at an automotive dealership. I bet you didn't know that this new, regulation now applies to you." And they go, "What are you talking about?" And now they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the expertise, they weren't budgeting for it, but oh, there's a deadline, you must be compliant by X. I think that's huge. And then I think the other thing is just how do they get the same level of security and treatment that they would get if they were an enterprise and they had that multi-million-dollar budget that they could spend? Because until recently, I don't think the community did a good job of bringing services and partnerships on the vendor side that were affordable. There's some big name ones, I won't name them. I spent more on a single appliance when working for federal healthcare than some of the companies I support's entire operating, annual operating budget.
I'm sure you did.
And those large vendors just don't want to operate in this space, but the space still needs their product. So it's like they weren't really doing a great job. I think there's an MSP community now of vendors that a lot of them are coming from MSPs. They sold their MSPs and they said, I saw a challenge, I saw a gap, let me fill it. So I think the community is doing a lot better, but I think there's still a lot of room for growth. And the SMB market needs more vendors to step up and say, I'm going to offer you something you need at a price point you can afford, and not try to hit a home run or grand slam on a sale right out of the gate.
Right. Well, so do you think that for those small and medium sized businesses, do you think that they're? And I'm not trying to put blame on them, but I'm just curious. Are you guys seeing small and medium sized businesses kind of biting off more than they can chew when it comes to their infrastructure, or and therefore which would incur higher costs for like assessments because the scope would be bigger, all these different things, or do you see them being prudent in the way that they're implementing their information systems that would ultimately need auditing and all this stuff that would then incur higher costs, or do you just generally see that, like, regardless of how small their infrastructure is, they're not getting cut a break when it comes to compliance costs?
I think some of it is they're not being cut a break, but some of it is there's an entry model like level price that you just have to pay. Whether let's say you're going to go get certified and the audit costs $50,000. Well, if you're a two-person company or 200, the price is still $50,000. Okay, that part's going to be hard to swallow the smaller you are, right?
Mm,
But put that aside, I don't blame the SMB market space. I think there's a problem or an issue where you want to stretch your dollars as far as you can. You want your infrastructure to last as long as you can. And as long as it's up and running, you don't necessarily want to replace it or move to cloud or whatever because it's an expense that you weren't planning on. But a lot of times delaying that hardware refresh or that move to cloud, that maturity, shift costs you in other ways that you weren't able to foresee. Software that can't be patched, vendors that don't exist anymore, problems in your audit, risks like you mentioned in your internal, enterprise risk register or risk management program. All these little things that they aren't taking into account. And I don't know if we as MSPs and as and you guys as vendor community, I don't know if we're doing a good job of highlighting those things to say you could spend 10 grand today and give everybody a new laptop and avoid $10,000 worth of project work over the next year. Now
mm.
your folks would have new equipment, you'd be more compliant, you'd have less vulnerabilities. Either way, you're going to spend the 10 grand. So how do you want to spend it? Keeping, patching that old system. So in those cases, I don't know if anyone's laying out a good scenario to tell people that what they're doing in trying to save money a lot of times is actually costing them more down the line.
What do you think MSPs can do to improve on that? Because, like, a lot of MSPs, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not an MSP, but, like, I'm assuming a lot of MSPs come in and there are portions of the customer systems that you're not even familiar with for the first couple of months of working with them. Like, how would you be able to know what to advise them on, holistically, or is that just a bad assumption on my part?
I think it's a valid assumption. I think it depends though on the type and size of MSP you're talking about. At our size, because we are large, we have a mature onboarding process. We do want to go through and learn those systems, learn those gaps, identify areas of weakness, identify end of life software and hardware. We're still going to onboard the customer because we want to get them onboarded as quickly as possible so we're not disrupting their business.
Right.
But at the end of onboarding, it's not just, well, you're off on your own. It's here's all the things that we identified. We'd like to sit down and talk to you about how do we plan these and work things into your fiscal cycle, work things into your risk appetite. But let's not forget these things that we identified. So I feel we have a robust onboarding process and identification process. There may be MSPs that are smaller that don't because they simply don't have the budget or the resources to do it because they don't have an entire team. I've met MSPs and I don't care what size you are. I love the fact that you're trying to help the community. But there are MSPs I've met that when I said, how many employees do you have? They 10, 12. Okay, how can you dedicate resources to doing this for each one of your clients? You've got to keep the lights
Yeah.
on. So I think that's an advantage in working with someone like an Integris is we've dedicated money to have an entire compliance team, to have an onboarding effort. Like each one of those things is taken as a dedicated service with resources to help the customer. Now, what they do with it after it, that's probably a toss up between how good a job we explaining the value in our services and how well they receive it.
Yeah, I guess this is a dangerous question then, but like for an MSP, and I guess also try to answer this if you could for OSCs too, like the customer. How much revenue are we talking before they would be really, in your opinion, really ready to take on some of these more large scale compliance obligations? Like you mentioned the 12-person MSP. That's probably a lower budget MSP that doesn't have all the resources. And we're also talking about these, smaller OSCs, small businesses. Like how much money should they? And again, this is a dangerous question. So, how much money would you say that they should be ready, not just internally to implement the requirements and to get assessed, but like as a proportionate approach to their revenue? You see what I'm saying? Like, not just
Yeah.
like, is there a barrier of entry that you see for revenue before a company should feel comfortable saying, yeah, I'm ready to start bidding on these higher dollar contracts that have the CMMC? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've been asked this question before, and I think it's less about a dollar amount or a percentage. It's more about how their business is structured. So
Mm,
for 4+ years, I've been advising customers on whether they should even play in the DoD space with the introduction of CMMC. And the way I look at it is like, let's say you have 100-person company and 90 of them support defense work and 10 are off doing some other commercial work. Now you compare it to another company with 100 employees where only 10 are supporting DoD and 90 are supporting commercial. Regardless of revenue, regardless of size, you have to make a decision: is the money and the business you're doing on the DoD side, you know, worth the
worth
expense
it.
you're going to put out, whatever that expense is, because each company's going to have a different expense based on their current maturity model. For the customer who's got 90% of their work in DoD, I'm almost going to say it's worth whatever it costs you because you're going to close shop if you lose your DoD work. But the
Right.
ones that have 10%, that's where I've been honest with them and transparent and said, do you want to keep doing the work? Is it profitable enough that it's worth it? If you have a single contract and you don't make enough in profit to cover the cost, maybe sell off that contract to another contractor and just focus on non-DoD work. It's just I think it's so dependent on how their organization is structured and how much work and revenue and profit is made up by the DoD work.
Mm.
And for some, I mean, honestly, like working with DoD is not fun. But in no way, I mean, okay, maybe if you're making the cool bombers, that's fun. But in general, it's not fun. So is the headache worth it for your company? Are you jumping through 50 different hoops that you wouldn't have to jump through if you just drop that one contract or not even drop it, just let it run and then don't go after the recompete. Because the other thing that I don't know if folks know this, clearly the DIP community should, is the day after you win a contract, you're immediately in recompete mode for that contract, as well as what other contracts you're going to win. Because once you win one, you think you're going to win them all. So they're spending a ton of money on business development in most cases.
Yeah.
So is this the right way to spend your money? And for some of them, it just may not be worth the headache and stress, regardless of the dollar amount. That's why I say I don't focus on the dollar amount. I focus on the
What
bigger
makes
picture.
best sense for the business in
Yeah.
general? Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I'm really more interested. And that's a good answer, and I think that's totally true. And we've had several we've had several contractors. I remember when I first started doing consulting, I had a lady like crying on the phone. It was during COVID, and I had a lady like one of the people we were working with and talking about helping them move towards 800 171 compliance from like a services perspective back when we did a lot of services. And she ended up like saying we can't do this. We can barely pay our employees, and it's because of the COVID halts and all this stuff. But it was also the percentage of the work being done for the DoD wasn't even worth the cost that it was going to take to implement the requirements on their end. So I remember instances like that, and I think that's a good answer. I guess let's assume, because I'm sure you've seen like numbers, and I'm sure you've worked with people. Let's assume that the company does realize that it is like like an 80-90% revenue stream for them of their whole revenue for the company. I'm just trying to figure out, like, when a small business comes and is trying to make a decision about how much they should be ready to spend. And that's part of why I was asking earlier about, like, are they biting off more than they can chew from their infrastructure side? Because like they might be a 10-person shop, but they've got this crazy complex infrastructure that they don't need, but that's what they
Mhm.
use to support their services. Like, I'm just trying to figure out what is that percentage that you see of, like, the revenue that's coming in versus how much they should be prepared to spend towards compliance and security and being ready to meet those contract obligations. I don't do you have an estimate, or
Yeah,
like, have you seen this?
I would say it's tough, but I would say based on things I'm hearing, even from Ozzy, your co-founder or founder and owner of IntelliGRC, of recent, values, they should probably plan to put 50,000 aside just for the audit process itself. Um,
Mm,
so that everyone has to pay that. So that's just a sunk cost, the cost of doing business. I would say potentially they should put anywhere from five to $15,000 aside for a true pre-assessment when they're first starting out. Really understand where you are and where your gaps are, because you're going to waste a lot of time and money
yeah.
if you don't have a good plan. So those two I look at as sunk costs that they're going to have to spend. Then it's just going to depend on what are the number of services that they have today and who's doing the work. The value in having an MSP, and especially an MSP of our size, is the partnerships that we have and the pricing that we can leverage.
Yeah.
We're going to be able to give them. I take Sim and SOC as the service that I always use as an example. It's typically the most expensive service that we'll sell on the security side, and it's the biggest cost that we have, with our vendors, right?
Right.
So let's just say a customer comes in and spends $2,000 a month on SimSock. They might say, "Wow, I can't afford to spend $2,000." Well, that's 24K a month. A single individual who can do the same work, and this is not the same as an entire SOC, but just actually understands the work, is going to cost you six figures. So
Right.
there's no way you can offset those costs, and we're going to get it to you at a lower price than a small MSP because of our negotiating power and our leverage.
Right.
So depending on how many services they have, maybe they have to add maybe they're adding $500 a month. They may have to add, 3,000 a month. It really comes down to what do they have and what's in place. And the other thing is how much they want to offload the work. I think with CMMC, they've got an opportunity to offload a ton of work onto the MSP at a far cheaper rate than if they did it themselves. And then they don't have to overcome the knowledge gaps and the how do I do this and making things collateral duties, because the minute you dump 50 collateral duties on your employee base, the rest of your work grinds to a halt. Um, so I
Yeah.
can't put an exact dollar amount on that, but I
Right.
always leverage it. I think you could pay for every service we have and everything that you need from our end to help you get certified for less than the cost of hiring one expensive employee. So if you can stomach hiring an employee, just come pay us to do the majority of the work. Like,
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And that's I think what we're seeing too. It's like, you're talking about just, and CMMC obviously isn't the only thing we think about, right? CMMC is like our main bread and butter, but like, for any compliance effort where you're wanting to be able to show that you have, continuous monitoring and audit log management and sim soc type services and maintain, like, structured maintenance efforts and patching and flaw, like all the things, right? From a IT white glove service perspective. I I don't know how. I don't know how you, like, especially for a small business. I don't know how you justify um not trying to work with an MSP, as opposed to trying to just hire somebody internally, unless the rebuttal from them would be, which I don't think is a totally absurd rebuttal, but like unless the rebuttal would be, I've got guys internally that can just wear multiple hats, and I'm like, and I've worked with those guys, and
Mhm.
it's like with anybody who wears multiple hats. There, with when your attention is divided between multiple different things, because I wear multiple hats, right? It's very tough to be consistent in everything that you're obligated to do, like that your role kind of expects you to do. I can imagine being the person who at one point is doing the contract work, say software development for, for the government, and sending them, shipping them the code or whatever. So you're a software developer while also being like the internal, security operations guy, reviewing logs and alerts and stuff. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like wearing these
Yeah.
multiple hats. Like I can't imagine, but that seems to be like the normal. If they're not working with an MSP and they're not big enough to really have a full scale ID department, that seems to be kind of like the normal how it works. I mean, are you seeing the same?
I am, but and this is where I kind of put out the warning to folks, specific around CMMC. So let's take a law firm maybe that dealt with ISO certifications. And let's say they have a small IT team, maybe 2 or 3 people, and that's good enough for their, 50-person company, whatever it is, just make something
Yeah.
up. Well, ISO is very documentation heavy, and they could go out and find someone who's done ISO work anywhere or has done ISO work for another, legal practice, and they could bring them in, and maybe for $100,000, this person really will run all of their compliance. Okay, that's a great addition. Why hire an MSP? You can hire one employee, or internal, you control every aspect of it. Great. That is not CMMC. Um, when we went when all of the audits I've been through, the majority of the way the auditors behaved was show me the documentation and then show me evidence that you're doing it. And most of the time that was here's my policy, here's a screenshot in the tool that I do it, or
Right.
screenshot in my PSA, whatever. I have never been through an audit like CMMC where it was show me the policy, show me the screenshot, now log into the tool, now go
And
show me
demonstrate it.
whatever I want to see,
Yeah.
show me where the ticket was created, now read off who did what work and who oversaw it and who reviewed it, and how is it being automated so that you don't forget to do it next week. Like the level of scrutiny and the number of steps you went through, and then the idea that, hey, there's 320 objectives that they can do this on. So I don't know which one. I can't fib my way through it because there's too many they could pick. What if they pick the next one I'm not doing right?
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. And kudos to them for trying to actually make sure people are doing what they're saying. That's not something you want to take on as a small business when you don't have that
Right.
expertise. Because again, I'll be transparent. We were forced to get on video and screen share and show the tools and us navigating them to show that we knew what we were doing. You don't want to pass off to a finance person. You got to go show how the SIM is being managed and how alerts are being managed.
Yeah.
That's just not doable. Like don't fail. Like you will fail if that's your approach. So don't do it. Outside of CMMC, maybe you roll the dice, but
Yeah.
not CMMC.
Yeah. I just think to the point, like at the end of the day, it's still going to be in many ways more cost effective, especially if
It
there's a
is.
risk of you failing your assessment. Like it's still going to be more cost effective. So no, I agree. I think that, and I think that is why IntelliGRC, and I mean, you've talked to Ozzy, so you kind of know this. This is why IntelliGRC has put such an emphasis on the MSP, because the MSP will always know the customer, the small businesses better than we ever could from a product perspective. And the MSP is going to be have the best resources available to help the most people, right? And that has been a big part of our ethics at Intelli is we want to help as many. IntelliGRC, as you probably know, was originally started supporting directly to SMB companies,
Mhm.
and we just realized the best way to help the most SMBs, the people who are most disenfranchised, is the MSP. And it's like
Right.
yeah, we're hoping more SMBs will take advantage and be blessed by the use of MSPs. So we agree.
Well,
Yeah,
if I could add to that too, I mean that's what drew me to the partnership with you all. I mean, Ozzy's a big part of it.
yeah, 100%.
Phenomenal guy, very knowledgeable. But what drew me to it was, to your point, we keep talking about the cost that companies are going to have to incur, and that's the cost of doing business. I think the one thing that we can say that helps is if you go through the method and process we put together in this partnership, we're using the IntelliGRC platform for our customers. It's going to give us the quickest, fastest, easiest, most well-documented way of saying, where are you? What are your gaps? What do we need to do to get you to perfect so you can get audited? Then we as the MSP have the services and the knowledge and expertise to deliver and close those gaps. For the client, it's a fixed cost. It might be a shock up front depending on what they have or don't have, but there's going to be a fixed cost that they can budget for every month. I feel like the alternative to our partnership and the tools and services is you never know what next month's
Yeah,
going to bring.
exactly. Up in the air.
Yeah.
It's like,
What new project? What did I forget? What am I missing? Oh, what didn't we know about? And I think that there's a certain amount of comfort involved when you say, okay, I'm just going to bite the bullet, but this is my fixed cost and I'm done. And just give it a certain
mm,
amount of time. We're going to run through the motions and then we're going to pass. I, I
yeah.
think, I don't know how you put a price tag on that, but I feel like there should be a price tag for that.
Yeah, maybe we'll do a case study or
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Um, well, I guess one of the next thing I wanted to ask you about is, I wanted to just kind of glean some insights from your all's actual internal CMMC efforts, because there are other MSPs and there are other, your customers maybe watching this, that maybe I think we all could agree that that first time going through a CMMC assessment was very insightful, like we said earlier. So I'm just curious. I have a couple questions, but just generally, what were the biggest takeaways from your all's, not just the assessment itself, but also preparing for it? Like what kind of surprised you or was a big takeaway?
So of the 320 objectives, because we don't have CUI, we will not store, process, transmit CUI, we really only had to meet about 270. So that cut us a slight break. We didn't meet the other CUI objectives, but it was that we wouldn't store it and our customers would. So that made it a little easier. But
Yeah.
even with the 270, it was very, very different. And like I said, the way they scrutinized everything, but it started earlier. It started with once we selected an auditor, and I highly recommend people one reach out for recommendations on auditors, but then interview multiple auditors. You have got to, for lack of better terms, enjoy working with this auditing firm, or it's going to
Yeah.
be brutal.
It's a
Um,
nightmare when you're not
yeah,
friends.
and auditors aren't like fun, go have beers with type people, right? It's a different dynamic when you're in that auditor customer relationship. But
Yeah.
you've got to really go interview these auditors and see who's going to be a good fit for you. What I was pleased about from our auditor's perspective is how much they did from a pre-scoping perspective to make sure we were turning in what we needed to even potentially be successful. They didn't want to waste their time or ours. They didn't want to have to reschedule and delay things. So there was a lot of pre-work that was done, and I appreciate that, even though it was a lot of hours. But then when we went into it, we felt confident. Okay, we're going to have some things that we fall short on, but they're not going to be big deals. And then through the process, having a daily outbrief of, hey, and here's something that was unique. No one ever said that you met the objective. We were trending
Trending.
towards
Yep.
meeting. Trending met. So there was always a chance you weren't, but you were trending. And here were the things that you weren't trending for. Hey, please go, find the evidence if you have it, or correct whatever. So that was nice. That was different than what I'm used to. Um, and then just again, in general, just the level of detail they went through was unlike anything I've ever seen, and the level of preparedness you had to have. But since we did, quite honestly, it wasn't that painful. I will say one other thing Ozzy and I have talked about. There were probably 3 to 5 controls or assessment objectives where we kind of misinterpreted what they meant, or at least what the auditor interprets them to mean. So we got in there and it was like, well, here's our evidence. I'm like, well, that's not what we're looking for. Well, we read things different than you. We read plain English alike a little bit different. So that was just unique, but they were very professional about, no, here's what the DoD expects. Are you doing it? So again, and that's where that relationship with the auditor comes in. That
Yeah. Yeah,
so
I agree with you. It is huge. I mean, and this is just the general sentiment every time, because I've had a couple assessments where, um, and we as at Intelli, we've supported a lot of companies through this. We've had a couple of assessments where, yeah, that chemistry wasn't there. But when it is there, man, it makes it so much smoother. Even if there's a problem, the correspondence, the getting through it, the understanding, you know, it's so much better when you have some good chemistry with the assessor. So I guess that is, if there's anything if people glean from this conversation, I 100% affirm what you just said, that interviewing, getting to know, there's a lot of companies that will do like assessment planning calls. And so that like that's but even before you but that's normally posterior to signing like a contract with them. Even like you said, like asking just to meet to kind of vet them and talk to them and see what their opinions on, like, not from a consultative perspective, but just generally getting to know them and their thoughts and how they think about things is huge. It's priceless when it comes to a $50,000 assessment or something like that, right? So I totally agree with that. For the ones that for the situation that you just mentioned about how there was like misinterpretations or different interpretations maybe of certain requirements, like say somebody, say you're talking to somebody who is going through something similar and they're just trying to understand what to expect as an outcome from an issue like that. Like what would your guidance be for them, and what did you experience when, obviously you don't have to name names or anything like that, but what did you experience when you came to a situation where you guys viewed the requirements one way, the assessor viewed it a different way?
I'll give you kind of a two-part answer. So the first part actually ties back to the interviewing the assessor um, portion first before we made a selection. When we did our interview, we actually brought up a few different controls that we knew were going to be those ones where, like, well, I always use vulnerability management as one. How often do I have to scan? What is the number of days I have to have criticals patched by where I'll pass or fail? Because I know what I'm doing, but I know my customers maybe aren't going to do it as frequently as I am, right? So I want
Yeah.
to gauge it. And one auditor was like, well, here's what the letter of the language says. Here's what we believe DOD's intent is, blah, blah, blah. Another auditor flat out just kind of got mad at us, but this is the way it has to be. You must do it this way. I refuse to do anything unethical. And it was like, well, we didn't ask you to do anything unethical. We're trying to evaluate how you approach
What the world?
same control, right? So that was the first half of, okay, you're out. If you're this
Yeah.
difficult to work with, then I'm, no. But then once we were in it, there were the few that came up. It was like, okay, we had the ability to ask the auditor, well, what is DoD's intent? Because we both have to read the same control. And it's on the screen. They screen share the control. Um, and we're both looking at the same language. We're both looking at NIST 800 171. So why are we not seeing the same thing? Well, maybe our environment's a little bit different than you think it is. Maybe we have to go back to our scoping doc. Maybe we have to go back to our diagram. And that's essentially what we did. We went back and said, we're unique. We're an MSP that falls under the ESP category, not an OSA. Things are going to be a little bit different than for our customers. And we were in no way were allowed to sway the auditor, and in no way could they help us. But they were allowed to say, well, this is the way that we were taught to interpret the control. And this is how we have to certify you. And that just gave us a little bit more insight to go back
Right.
and go, I know I'm doing it. I'm just not presenting it in a way that makes sense to you. Let me
Yeah.
go get it. And then we would have to produce new evidence. And then we did have the evidence. So we trended met. Um, but it was just that, hey, we have two different views of the world, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I and that it doesn't help. We all acknowledge, and I'm hoping this will change, but it doesn't help that there's no um, formal assessment guides for external service providers. So it's kind of like what you just said. We have to help MSPs right now prepare to be assessed as if they were an OSA in
Mhm.
many ways, while also acknowledging the obvious. Like if you're not storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, and the only thing you really might have that matters is customer security protection data, like login information and logs and vulnerability scan results and things like that, you know, it is going to look a little different than your customers who do have CUI. Like it's just objectively going to look different. And you're not going to implement FIPS validated encryption. I mean, unless you want to, on SPD. Like you're not going to do that. So I agree with you. That is something that we're working, and I'm sure you kind of in prepping for this and talking with Philip and talking with the guys, because I didn't work on y'all's contract, but I remember supporting them internally.
Right.
And like it's, we're working with the best information we have available, and that's been codified and precedent setting. And there's a lot missing there. So yeah, I agree with you. It is a little bit they're looking at the world a little differently because they have to. That's all they have. They only have the cap for general OSA, right? They don't have a cap specifically tailored to, there's no, for example, I'm assuming that your assessors, you don't have to name names, of course, but I'm assuming your assessors validated your all CRM. Like they looked through your CRM, they made sure it makes sense and made sure that it's something that they would accept if they were assessing your customers, right?
Not only did they look through it, but during the audit on numerous controls or numerous objectives, uh, after we showed our policy, showed our screenshots, logged into the tools, they would pull for us, we called it the SRM, but they
Yeah.
would pull our SRM back up and they go, well, now let's see what you say you're doing to see if it matches everything you just showed us and what your responsibility is versus your clients. And that was
Right.
one thing. I wrote the SRM for Integris. I tried to make it as clear in layman's terms for us and our clients. So you read all the stuff that has to be in every SRM, and then you get over and there's two columns: Integris responsibility, client responsibility. And virtually every one of my statements was Integris will go do X, Y, and Z. Client is responsible for A, B, C. Very clear cut who has to do what.
Beautiful. French kiss.
It's not as pretty as many of them that I've seen from big companies that have gone through FedRAMP certification, CMMC, whatever. But I could clearly understand, what do I owe my client and what does my client owe us so that they can pass.
Yeah.
And the auditors went to it over and over and over to make sure everything jived. So
Aligned. Yeah. Well, and the point of me bringing up, which by the way, I said French kiss, not chef's kiss. I meant to say chef's kiss.
I
For
wasn't listening.
you weren't listening. No, I'm just kidding. Other people out there might have. So no, but the reason I bring that up is like the current cap does not require that. There's nothing that tells an assessor to go and review the CRM when the MSP is who you're actually certifying, unless the MSP has a CRM from other providers that help them satisfy requirements. That's all. So I like the fact that they're doing that. It's great that they're doing that, but that's what I mean is like we're working with the best information and the best like prudence that we have right now. And I think the assessors are the same way. They're working with the best information and guidance that they have right now, but a lot of it hasn't been codified. So I think that's a good way to approach it. What would you say? Would you say that there was any unreasonable situations that you take back and you're like, okay, yeah, I need to make sure all my customers are ready for that situation?
Nothing unreasonable. I mean, definitely the both sides have to be ready to be able to walk through everything and show that you're doing it on a daily basis. This idea that you're going to log in and fumble through something and show the auditor that you rarely do this, but you say you're doing it all the time,
Not gonna
that's a
fly.
roadblock or kind of a hurdle you don't want to have to go. But I will give an example of when we approached CMMC through the advice that you guys gave us. We did not have anything listed as not applicable. Even at like the CUI stuff, we did not put not applicable. We put a
Right.
statement in there. And so for ours, we put that we did not store, process, or transmit CUI. We went a step further at your recommendation and we had CUI spillage procedures and we did tabletop tests so that everyone in the company knew how to handle CUI. We've got a mechanism for reporting the spillage. So we did 4 or 5 extra steps that I don't even feel we should have had to do. But I did them because I was like, this is 47 or 48 objectives. And if I do this one thing, I'm going to pass them versus have to argue. I've been through other audits where I went through a high trust audit, as an example, and there was a control that spoke about how you look for rogue access points. Well, I didn't have a physical building, so there was no way to have a rogue access point. And I put not applicable, and I literally had to argue for 30 minutes with the auditor. I did not want to do that with CMMC, and
You didn't have
I
to.
didn't have to, but I also don't want our customers to do that either. So everything was
Right.
from the approach of how do we make it as, I hate to say this, as pleasurable for the auditor as could be, because the less they're inconvenienced, the less I perceive that they will inconvenience me. I'm also, through experience, I know that once something doesn't look right, they will pull a thread and they'll keep pulling the thread as long as something doesn't look right. So I don't want to give them any reason to go in
Yeah.
there and doubt something. I want everything to come back and go, these are the most like on top of it group I've ever been with. And I won't call out any names, but I think when we went through ours, it took us 3.5 days. We were among the fastest to have gone through it with that auditor because everything was like,
Right.
we were 99% where we needed to be when we stepped into it. So I think that's just a
Yeah.
testament to all the work and effort that we did. When we probably, as a company, put in 2,000 man hours in advance of this, even with our posture where it was and our massive amounts of documentation. So we did a lot up front and it paid dividends in the audit. And now, again, I think this is the benefit of working with us is we know exactly how to go deliver it so our clients can pass.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember just hearing many times internally, man, they're crushing it. They're doing it right. Oh, this problem came up, but yeah, we're tackling it. Like, I love that when working with, because I'm on the service, well, the internal consulting side too. And, I have my own customers that we deal with. And it's always like, you always feel the best sense of gratification when you're working with like like a client that is like, they're not just trying to check a box per se, or they're doing this because they kind of feel like they have to, but then like 3 months in they fizzle out in their fervor for it. Like, oh, it's always the best experience for us. So like I said, like if somebody's listening to this and they're trying to figure out, what's the best way to move forward implementing CMMC or any GRC effort for that
Mhm.
matter, like, you've got to have fervor for it, like, all the way through. And like, you guys are a testament to how that paid dividends, because it was up until like the last, couple days before the assessment even started, and even during the assessment, where there's like back end comms, like, we got to crush this real quick, we got to make this a update, like, there, and that's one of the pieces of advice that we have, and I'm sure you would agree that, like, it is very challenging to implement a GRC program when, and we say this all the time, when there's not at least one or more people, like, that is their life, that is what they're
Mhm.
dedicated to doing. I know that, that's been kind of part of you, from a part of your role from an internal perspective during the implementation, but I'm sure that, as the company moves on, and now that you've got your certification and you're in this continuous monitoring phase for the rest of your all's existence, maybe that responsibility will shift to someone else, or whatever the case may be. But the point being, it is, we've seen it time and time again, where companies that just, again, this multi-hat perspective, where there's not somebody, or at least one person, or even a team of people, that it is their job, at least one of the primary functions of their job, to make sure things are stayed on top of when it comes to GRC. A lot of times they just fizzle out, and we've seen that even in our contracts with clients to help consult them, is the point of contact on their side, it just kind of fizzles out, because they have all these other things that they're legitimately having to worry about. So I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think like one of the things that you all gave us a lot of recommendations, and for the most part, I think we adopted them. There was one area we didn't. It was on documentation. And I'll keep a little bit secret just because I want us to have a little bit of a
Secret
competitive
sauce.
advantage. You know,
Yeah.
but there was language in the documentation, even from templates that you all provided us, that we chose not to use because we had a robust documentation library already. We have
Mm,
multiple certifications, and it's like certain language exists for certain reasons. Different auditors want to see different things. We didn't want to have two sets of policies,
right.
so we weren't going to use what you recommended. We were going to use what we did. And at one point, I remember one of the auditors or assessors saying, "Well, you don't have a section on X." And I'm like, I know we do because I wrote it. But what ended up happening was I didn't use the word they used. So they were doing a keyword search for a heading, and I used a similar, like something you get out of a
The
thesaurus.
same principle, but a different
Right.
word, right?
But just not the CMMC word that they wanted. And then as soon as I found it, I was like, oh, it's right here. And they're like, oh, we didn't find it. I said, you did a keyword search, didn't you? Now, in hindsight, could I have made the job a lot easier by just using what you all told me? Absolutely. And for any of our customers who lack documentation, I'm absolutely going to recommend that we use yours. But it was one of those times where I deviated from the recommendations and it bit me, but we got through it. And it was one
But
of
there's
those
a
last minute things.
continuity, like, there's a business continuity
Yeah.
perspective, like, when you're dealing with any consultant, sometimes it's just the sheer reality that this is not going to fit our business. Now, yeah, it might mean we had to answer a couple questions during our assessment, but at the end of the day, you guys had robust documentation, right? You had robust, we might have had to add a sentence here or there or whatever. I don't remember. Again, I wasn't
Yeah.
involved in y'all specifically, but it's always the case when you're implementing 800, 171. Two big things change, right? Like major things change. One, it's come almost inevitable that some element of the company's culture will change, right? Where people aren't able to shoot from the hip anymore on a lot of things. They have to document it. They have to record that they did it. They have to fill out a ticket or a change request or whatever the situation is. There's an element of convenience oftentimes that gets removed because the GRC is documentation, right? A lot of it is documentation. And then the other thing that changes is it's always like, even if you already have a pretty robust security program, it's always inevitable that something from a documentation or a technical perspective is going to get adjusted to kind of fit the mold that as vendor agnostic as 800.171 is, and most GRC programs are, frameworks are, there are things that there's a little bit of a mold that there's a little bit of a border that they're kind of wanting you to kind of stay within. So yeah, that changed. So I mean, that makes sense to me though. Like I don't want companies to just implement our templates. If we have templates, we've got some AI things coming out obviously that are going to help make it more specific on the outset instead of you having to fill out a template. That's what Alfie and Evan are for too, for the SSB. But like, I don't want people to do things just to make it the most easy assessment possible, if it also means at the end of the day that their business operations are going to suffer for it. And I think you guys recognize that. And like, you tell me, like, does the day-to-day posterior to implementing 800.171 for Integris feel a whole lot different than it was before?
Wouldn't say it feels a whole lot different. There are differences. Laptops and workstations are locked down more than they were before. What you can do with them is a bit more locked down.
Yeah.
There's a lot more blocking of applications. I mean, we already had some in place, but there's more now. So there's a little bit of an adjustment. I think the biggest adjustment was we went out and identified prior to the audit about 60 or 70 people who were going to be immediately supporting our current DIP customers. And I personally led 4 training sessions to get them trained,
Nice.
go through role-based training to understand the differences. The spillage, CUI spillage was a big item
Yeah.
on there, train them on how to put those types of things in, how to handle it, do tabletops. And then once we were certified, it was like, well, this is not, we're a company of approximately 800. So we can't have just 10% of our company that can support the DIP customer because you don't
You
know
got to
when they
expand,
might.
right?
And what if they need help Saturday night at midnight, right? So we've made a big push that over time we're getting the entire company through the training, um, not certified, so to speak, because that's not certified, but through our own internal kind of certification
Right.
process.
You're expanding the assets within your scope in
Yeah,
a
because what
right.
a lot of folks don't know on either the OSA or ESP side is that unless they go through that training, they're not allowed to have access to customer resources that could have CUI and applications that they might want to look up username and passwords or hey, here's how I've got this environment configured.
Mm.
So we actually took away access from over 700 people, some who aren't client facing that, okay, I never needed it anyway.
Yeah.
But for those that were client facing was how was I going to do my job? Well, this is our big push to get everybody through our training because we want everyone to be able to support all of our customers, even if you're not directly supporting a DIP customer today. And I think again
Yeah.
that makes a big, it's a big differentiator. It makes administration easier for us, and it makes it a better experience for the client. So
Mm.
we'll just make everybody go through, a couple hours of training to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think that is a wise, uh, just feedback for anybody, thinking about how they're going to do this is, especially from the mouth of a larger MSP like you guys, there are situations where you got to kind of start smaller. It's not, it doesn't mean you have to do an enclave, right? Like, and I feel like there's this dichotomy. It's either enterprise or it's either enclave. And when we say enterprise, we're meaning everybody, everything. And it's like, no, 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 no. There's still ways that you can reduce your scope, even if your approach is the enterprise information system. You can use access controls with security groups, roll, RBAC schemas and things like that to help reduce things down. But yeah, if you can also prepare and following your processes and procedures for adding new people to the environment, you can grow that to where everybody who needs to be in scope eventually will be in scope long term to support your fully support your your uh, the amount of customers that you have that are in that space. And then at the end of the day, that means everybody kind of is being benefited by the security program, not just the people you start with. But sometimes you do have to start smaller. So no, I think that that's a good takeaway and insight that people should be prepared to maybe need to rethink how they're going to approach it.
I
Um,
think the OSA div customer needs to approach it the same way. We put a boundary around the entire organization, so we use the enterprise model, not the enclave. But
mhm.
from an enclave definition perspective, we enclave the people and their devices that could support
Yeah,
initially to make the
exactly.
scope and the audit simpler and just less complex because of our size. But the whole org was there. So now we didn't have to change out tools. We didn't have to change out major processes and
Right.
procedures. So like everything, the business was able to continue operating and it was able to continue operating for all of our non div customers. I think the
Yeah.
OSAs need, our clients need to do the same thing is why not take in your whole company from a boundary perspective? You don't have to swap out all your tools and all that, but maybe you limit the number of people who have access to that data and then you expand over time, just like we did.
Yeah,
So
I love that. I think everybody should take that to heart. Um, well, I know that we're coming up on time. I did want to ask you, what kind of hobbies you into lately? What kind of things that you spending some time with outside of work to where when you're done thinking about GRC for hours and hours and hours, what can people expect to find you doing?
normally I would say I love to travel, but so I moved to South Carolina last year, just right at
Oh
about a
wow.
year ago this week. And the wife and I were building a house. We broke ground around beginning of June, and we're literally just started moving into it last weekend. So for the past couple months, well, for the past 6 months, all it's been is, down there watching the house we built, and now everything's moving in. So as soon as I get off work, I log off and let's go unpack boxes and move. So I wish I had free time for other stuff, but the reality is it's all sunk into the home.
That's awesome. I mean, you guys were able to build it like custom exactly what you wanted kind of thing. That's so cool.
Yeah,
That's the dream, right? That's the dream. One day I'd like to, my wife, at the time of recording this, it's February, and my wife is pregnant with twins, and we have
congrats.
three children, and we live in I'm very thankful for what God's provided us, but it's definitely getting a little cramped. And so yeah, I think about that too. I'm excited for whatever comes our way and however we're provided for. But yeah, that is the dream. One day maybe to build something that's exactly what you need. Doesn't have to be crazy extravagant, just but to meet our needs. And I'm excited for you. That's really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, I've got a large basement, so that's my man cave. So we're gonna
Yeah,
we're gonna move in and we're gonna get everything the way the wife wants so that she's happy. And then once she says I'm good, I will no longer
it's
be
your
sad.
turn.
I'll be in my
It's your turn. But okay, I gotta ask though. I gotta ask because you said it earlier. But you said that for a period of time you were kind of relaxing and chilling out before you got serious about your career and stuff. And you said you played video games. I gotta ask, what do you play now?
no.
No,
No, I
none.
gave it. I gave it up the day I was living overseas, and the contract I worked on was like they call you when they need you, so you could sit there for 8 hours and not get a phone call.
Mm.
And I played. It was called World of Tanks. For anybody who might know what that is, but
Yes,
I
World of
love the game.
Tanks.
But I
My dad
obsessed
played
over
that.
that
I
video
played
game.
that.
I played it at work. I played it at home. I was going to bed at 3 in the morning and getting up, to work at 7. I don't know how I functioned, to be quite honest. And the day that I moved back stateside, I uninstalled it and I've never played again. So
Oh well, hey, there's always you can always start back up again.
it's not a good use of my time.
I doubt you'll want to do that. Hey, the new one everybody plays is called War Thunder. So they added, that comes with tanks, but also airplanes and ships, and it's all into one big package. So, hey, not trying to tempt you or anything.
My time is better spent on family
Hey,
or
that's
improving
good.
the house or whatever it is, right?
That's good. Well, Dr. Jerry, I really appreciate it. I love this conversation. I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot of stuff that people could benefit from here. So, I mean, anything else you wanted to say before we close out?
No, like I said, this is a great opportunity for people. If we just get over the fact that it's going to be some work up front, but it's not that long. It's not that bad. It's a great opportunity. Integris is here to help. I mean, if you're already our client, then I'm grateful for that. But please be reaching out and working with us so we can get you compliant. If you're not and you're looking for an MSP that's gone through it, please reach out to us. Go out to Integris's website. Just reach out. We're here. We want to help the We want to help the SMB market. You guys need help. You've been kind of tossed to the side from the vendor perspective. So we really want to help you. Just reach out and take care.
All right, guys. Well, thank you, Dr. Jerry. And those who
Thanks,
are
Steve.
listening, we'll see you in the next one.
Have a good one. Thanks to you.